reception, which is in Maxie's upstairs. And that will be when Byron lets you go. And our next panel is groundwater. It's come up a lot this morning, and it is a big issue for California. And we've got a good person to moderate this panel. We have our own Byron Buck, who is our board member, and he is Executive Director of the State and Federal Contractors Water Agency, and that's a joint powers authority made up of, I guess you can guess, the CBP and the SWP. Byron has many years of background in water resources and environmental planning, having operated a consulting practice for 10 years and served in executive capacities for water agencies, special districts, and nonprofits. And we thank you for helping us get this group together here today.
Thank you, Rita. Good afternoon. It's always a challenge to be the last panel of the day, and I am acutely aware that the only thing that stands between you and the bar is me. So we are going to try to make this pretty lively and interesting. Rita has given us permission to run over, so we're not going to end right at 4 o'clock, so those of you who are really thirsty, if you just want to drift out, that's fine. I'm going to be kind of abbreviating the bios here and give everybody a chance to sort of take 3 to 5 minutes to give their initial perspective. But my job here is kind of agent provocateur. We're going to do it kind of as a talk show format. I'm going to lay out some very unfair, open-ended questions which are almost impossible to answer to generate lively discussion as a panel. So with that, we'll get going on bios. But we're also going to handle the question process slightly differently. Staff's going to hand out cards during the discussions on the questions, and you also can play agent provocateur and anonymously submit the most wicked question you can think of with respect to groundwater. I will sort through those and also then put them on the spot with tough stuff, because this is an issue that's, I think, very current, very divergent views. It's probably a really tough one that ever hits the legislature, which is why we have the problems with it we do today. So I'm going to do a very abbreviated bios again. The bios for everybody are in your packet. I'm not going to mention degrees, with the exception of Paula Landis, who's with the Chief DWR and the Chief of the Division of Integrated Water Resources Management, or Water Management. She's got a degree in civil engineering, so clearly she decided she needed a job, but she also has a Bachelor's of Arts in Art and French and a Master's degree in art history. And I've had the pleasure of working with Paula quite a bit. She is certainly a Renaissance woman, and so we welcome her to the panel. To her right is Tim Quinn, Executive Director of the Association of California Water Agencies, an organization which I'm sure most of you know delivers or is responsible for about 90% of the water delivered in the state. Tim has a long, distinguished career in the water industry, if you've ever been into his office and seen all the plaques and pictures of famous people he's been with. And prior to that, he was a Deputy General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Dave Orth is with the Kings River Conservation District. He's the General Manager there. They have an agency that encompasses 1.2 million acres in the San Joaquin Valley, doing some very innovative things down there. He is on the Association of California Water Agencies Region 6 Board and also on the Water Education Foundation Board. Juliette Christian Smith is a Senior Research Associate with the Pacific Institute's Water Program. She's also a Fulbright Fellowship Scholar and recently examining agricultural water use in the Alentejo area of Portugal. She's got a whole host of other awards. I would refer you to the bio on that. Maurice Hall with the Nature Conservancy is the Associate Director of the Nature Conservancy's California Water Program, responsible for integrated water management strategies. He has an incredibly varied technical background in hydrology and water resources engineering, including being a professor of engineering geology at Radford University in Virginia. So a real diverse panel here we have today. I'm going to ask each of them to take about 3 to 5 minutes to give sort of an opening perspective on California and groundwater management, and then we'll get into the wicked questions while the cards go out and you formulate your own. So why don't we start down at the end with Maurice and work our way towards me.
Good morning. I want to thank you for having me here. I appreciate the Water Education Foundation giving us a chance to talk about groundwater, which is an issue that's really important to us, and I will explain why. I, like Jeff Mount, struggle without a PowerPoint, and in addition, I had my teenage son print this out for me, and I think he missed a couple of pages, so we'll get all the main points. As Byron said, I'm with the Nature Conservancy, and I'm a water resources engineer, hydrologist, and just a little bit about the Nature Conservancy. We are an environmental organization working to preserve biodiversity, and we do that in primarily by protecting lands and waters that support the habitat and the species that we're working to protect. And there are two important tenets that drive the way we work, and the person, I almost have to apologize after Jeff Mount's talk, but one is that our work we consider to be very much science-driven. We try to ask the hard questions and question the general consensus and make sure that we're interjecting good science into the work we do. And in addition, we work on the ground in particular places in concert with the communities around us. As a result, in California, we work from San Diego County up to Siskiyou County, and we own properties. We actually manage a lot of farmland. We do wildlife compatible farming. We restore rivers, and we even own water rights that we try to put to good use for the environments that we're working to protect. So why is it that we care about groundwater, you might ask? Well, basically it's that a lot of the ecosystems and the species that we're working to protect depend on groundwater. And I'm not talking about a couple of odd colorless snails or worms that might live in caves. It's much bigger than that. Groundwater pretty much affects all of the freshwater species that we're working to protect. And that is because groundwater affects streams, groundwater supports wetlands, groundwater supports riparian habitat, and so pretty much all the aquatic species that we're working to protect in California depend on groundwater for a good part of their water supply. Now, you've probably heard a good bit about the groundwater service connection, and that's something, the groundwater and surface water connection, that's something that I spend a good bit of time preaching about, but I want to briefly just say that pretty much any time that you have a stream flowing over an alluvial aquifer or a valley field aquifer, which in California represents most of our groundwater, all the blue blobs that you see on the popular DWR map of groundwater basins, that's alluvial field, valley field aquifers. So pretty much any time you have a stream that's flowing over a valley field aquifer, you have a connection of that stream with the groundwater. And if the groundwater levels are high, the stream gains water from the groundwater, and if the groundwater levels are low, the stream loses water to groundwater. And so this happens all the time. It's not limited to a few locations. It pretty much happens everywhere. The principles are well known, and it's not a mystery. It's just a little difficult to observe. And if you pump groundwater from these aquifers, you're going to have an effect on stream flow. Sometimes it's masked. Sometimes it's hard to define what pumping is affecting what flow, but it happens. And so our issue at TNC is primarily restoring the ecosystems, but we're part of a community in California that includes farms, and includes cities, and includes residences, and we all depend on the same water supply. And so if the pumping affects flow for fish, it also affects the surface water flows that someone downstream depends on to provide their water that they have diversion rights to. So just the main points that you'll probably hear me reiterate as we respond to the questions are, there's a lot of focus lately on the issue of overdraft. And that's really important. It's a big concern. It's a problem in our groundwater. But what I want to get across is that there are a lot of issues related to groundwater management that we need to deal with well before it gets to the point of overdraft. You can have a groundwater basin that's fairly full. The Sacramento River Basin, for instance, in general, the Sacramento River Valley has high groundwater levels. But the pumping in those areas still affect surface water flows. They affect ecosystems that depend on them, like riparian forests. And so we have to look at groundwater management not just an issue of overdraft, but long before overdraft, we need to pay attention to it, manage it, and understand the implications of the way we manage the groundwater.
Maurice, thanks. By the way, panel members, if you hear my timer go off, that's time to wrap on the 5 minutes. So we kind of get after this. Paula?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to be here today. Groundwater is obviously a very important subject. And being a public agency, we have the enviable position of being damned if you do and damned if you don't. And a couple of years ago, you may recall, we had a pretty devastating drought. And the Department of Water Resources was working to see what we could do to alleviate some of the water shortages and trouble people were suffering. And they would call and say, you know, our groundwater is being overdrafted, our wells are going dry, etc. And we'd say, well, what can we do? And they'd say, well, send money, send water. And we thought and said, how about a hug? we don't have water or money. But at the same time, we're getting these counties declaring disasters because of groundwater shortages. We're getting pressure from the governor and the legislature to tell them what's going on with groundwater. And we didn't know. The Department of Water Resources does collect quite extensively to the amount that funding and staffing allows groundwater elevations. It's not comprehensive. It's not done more than once a year in most places, and there are parts of the state where they do not want us to have the information, but they still want us to rush in and help when the need is there. And I don't know if this was any of the impetus behind SB 7X6, but it may have been. S7X6, for those of you who don't recognize it by the number, is the groundwater elevation monitoring legislation. And we fondly call it CASGEM, which Jared Huffman struggled with, but it's California statewide groundwater elevation monitoring. And it gives the department the task, although not a lot of authority, not a lot of staff, and not a lot of money, but a whole lot of deadlines, to no bitterness on my part. It gives the department the task of defining monitoring entities around the state, establishing how they can collect water elevations, when they can report it, etc. And one of the other things that the legislation requires is that this information be made public. And if the entities choose not to participate, then they are ineligible to compete for our grants and loans program. So there's a pretty good incentive out there for us to get the information. And we have great staff who've worked real hard and have made a lot of progress in this direction. And we did get a electronic submittal system up and more or less running by the deadline of the end of the calendar year. And we do have the submittals from the entities, and we are in the process of evaluating them, and then the next step will be collecting the data. But that's pretty much where our mandate stops. We have to report on this every 5 years, but it doesn't give us any authority to manage, and that is a misconception that a lot of people have, including the legislature. We had many, many questions during this recent budget cycle, and all of them ask us about what we were doing about groundwater management. We don't manage groundwater, it's managed at the local level. What we do is now collect simply the elevation of the groundwater. I think that some of the questions that Byron's going to be asking later on will maybe go into this a little bit more, but in any case, that's a general outline of where we are in the department in terms of our activities for groundwater. We understand the importance of groundwater. And in our integrated regional water management programs, we have a requirement that, as the term integrated would suggest, that they need to look at flood protection, water supply, that's groundwater, surface water, the environment, etc. So groundwater is part of that package as well. So that'll do for now.
Right on time, Jim.
Thank you, Byron. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to take a fairly broad, which is my habit, to take a fairly broad policy perspective on this question. It's really dangerous to look at it from too narrow of a perspective. Many of you are aware that it wasn't an easy decision that my board of directors went through, but they wound up being very strong supporters of the comprehensive water legislation that was passed in 2009, and we remain so. We believe that that 2009 package gives Cal a framework that we can move forward with in ways that will work for our environment and for our economy. And more important for this panel, we believe that sustainable, underline the word sustainable in your mind, groundwater management is an essential part of that comprehensive framework. We partnered with the Department of Water Resources, I thought very successfully, going all around the state on the CASGEM program. We went to groundwater basins where they said, not in my basin, and we said, yes, in your basin. And we need to keep saying that. Maybe more importantly, on April 4th, we will release a groundwater framework document. That's the word that we call it. That I would encourage you to pay attention to. You can go on our website, aqua.com, and it'll give you information about when and where if you'd like to learn more about it. But the framework document, I think when you read it, you'll say, my goodness, Aqua's member agencies produced this. It's a very powerful statement that first wants to make people understand how much we've been doing in the last decade to advance the cause of groundwater management, more than we get credit for. People write as though it's an unmanaged resource in California. That is not fair or accurate. But with that said, there is a recognition that we have to raise the bar high and then get over that raised bar if we're going to have sustainable groundwater basins in the future. Sustainability, loosely defined, is it's got to work for the environment and the economy and protect the long-run health of that groundwater basin, which means your basin's got to be in balance within the framework of your plan. From that broad context, I want to make 3 points that I will almost certainly refer to in the question and answer period. First, we have the tools today. It's not that we don't have water management tools for groundwater, we have them. Through local powers of various local agencies, the AB 3030 process, SB 1938, the IRWIMP process, those are powerful tools that have been used to create hundreds of locally controlled groundwater management programs. The problem isn't that we don't have enough tools, the problem is we don't apply the tools in enough areas. We need to make sure that their coverage is geographically broad. Second point is that sustainable management over the long term of those groundwater basins is possible only as part of a comprehensive program. If you just focus on the groundwater basins alone, you are going to fail. You have to fix the delta with the conveyance solution. You need more storage to park that water until the groundwater basins can take it. And you're going to have to invest substantially in local resource development, recycling, desalinating water so that your demands for that imported water are down even when it's wet so you can get your water into storage. But if you isolate it and pretend you can focus on this policy question alone, you will fail. It has to be part of that comprehensive solution that we put into play back in 2009. And third, this won't surprise you coming from the Aqua guy, we strongly believe that it needs to be locally controlled. The state cannot come in and tell you how to manage your groundwater basins. 35 years ago, I wrote a PhD dissertation on groundwater management in California. The main lesson I learned was one size doesn't fit all. You have to tailor that program to local circumstances. The state may put some parameters out there that you need to aim for, but they've got to give the locals the management flexibility to devise a sustainability-based program that works in that area. And I'll be ready for, I think I'm under my time.